Hello and welcome to LM Teaches English. In this video we're going to be looking at the poem London by William Blake, which is from the AQA Power and Conflict anthology of poetry. So first of all we'll look at, we'll read the poem, then we'll look at the poet himself and the relevance of the title, then we'll look at some key quotes that I've picked out and the language use. Finally, we will link to themes and I will give you a question that you can answer as well. So let's read the poem first of all. London by William Blake. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most, through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So it's a bit of a misleading poem if you look at the rhyme scheme, which is an A-B rhyme scheme. So we've got street, flow, meet, woe, man, fear, ban, hear, etc. And the reason that's misleading is because it's quite a childlike rhythm pattern, almost like you would find in a nursery rhyme or kind of children's poetry. And obviously the reason that's misleading is because the poem itself is very bleak and very dark and about some of the most serious political matters that were happening in London at the time in the 19th century, 18th century. So first of all, William Blake himself was a strong believer in God. However, he was anti-religion, he was anti-organised religion, so he was against the church and he was against also the government, and the reason for that was because he didn't feel like those groups were doing enough to help poverty in London at the time. And I think if you look at Charles Dickens and the things that he wrote about, especially in A Christmas Carol, these two guys were concerned with very similar things, as well as Percy Shelley, who is also in this anthology, very anti-establishment and sort of for the people. So William Blake was an artist and he was also anti-church and government. You can just say anti-establishment in your writing. And he wrote about London, which was his hometown, because he wanted to highlight poverty. And sort of, not just poverty, but also the fact that nobody was doing anything about it. He was angry. He wanted to incite revolution, and we know that William Blake himself was almost as angry with the let's call them working class people, the poor people, as he was with the ruling classes, because he felt like they should be doing more to fight against this. So he took ideas from the French Revolution, which had recently happened, where the sort of the people had stood up for, I put revolutions, that is I suppose true, the people had stood up for what they believed in, and he wanted the people of London to do this too. So this poem is about him kind of on his walk through London and the things that he sees, and the things that he sees include the ruling classes owning everything and the poor people just accepting it, just being so weak they just accept it. So the first two lines I couldn't really separate because they were so important. So we've got, I wander through each chartered street near where the chartered Thames does flow. And so we've got a few words here that I want to talk to you about. So we've got wander, we've got chartered, which is of course repeated. So we've got repetition before we even begin. We've got the fact that this verb wander is quite peaceful almost. To wander is quite a nice thing to do, but that of course juxtaposes the word chartered, which means owned, and in this case owned by the government. So we've got this juxtaposition, which again happens with the Thames, which is flowing. So for something to flow, it implies freedom, a lack of constraints, quite the opposite of the chartered Thames in this case. So it's almost like it's fighting against itself. So the juxtaposition in this case symbolises that it's fighting, London is fighting against itself. It's in these chains, which again is an image repeated later with the manacles. It's in these chains, but it wants to be free. And we get that from the first line. The repetition of chartered sort of reinforces Blake's anger as well. When you get repetition, you get a sense of anger or frustration from the person speaking, from the speaker. The next line that I've picked up on here is the next two lines of the first stanza. Actually, it's very important, but I've put an ellipsis between it, so I'm not repeating too much. But the full section is, a mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. So one thing that I've missed out here is the word marks, but you could look at that because it's got that implication of people having physical marks on their faces, perhaps from being treated badly in the factories where they work, or in the case of children being chimney sweepers and perhaps being injured from that difficult, dangerous job. And also to mark something is to notice it as well. So he's noticing these looks on people's faces, these marks, which could be looks or physical marks. Physical, injuries. So we've got here the weakness and woe, which is alliterated. Again, I think here he's kind of mocking the people. Weakness and woe, and the rhyming creates a kind of, you get an image of somebody sort of, when people say, oh, I've got the world's tiniest violin, it's like he's got this sympathy, this mock sympathy for them. Because what he really wants them to do, as we know, is he wants them to get up and fight. He wants the people of London to be as angry as he is. He doesn't want them to be weak. He wants them to be angry. And he repeats this word every as well in the next stanza. Every cry of every man, every infant's cry of fear, every voice, every ban. It's inescapable. And as I said before, the repetition here implies frustration. Come on, people, do something about this. Get angry, let's make this change. The next line that we have here is the mind-forged manacles. He continues with that repetition of the sounds. So the M in this case is alliterated. So we've got the rhyme, the alliteration, all of this adds together to create a playful tone, to show how mocking he's being. In this case, the mind-forged manacles, he's even more cross because he's implying that these people have put these restrictions on themselves. These restrictions are in their heads. So self-made, if you like. You're not really restricted. You're not really trapped or chained up. This is just you're being brainwashed, or you've convinced yourself that you are. You can do something about it. It's a very powerful message, and he wanted people to take this on board. Remember, he's trying to incite revolution. The next line, soldiers' sighs runs in blood down palace walls. We have these S sound. Again, we've got this sibilance, it's called, when it's the repetition of an S sound. Perhaps showing the anger he feels. Perhaps the sound of bullets coming from the soldiers' guns. But the message of this line, of course, is that the soldiers' blood is what's keeping these palace walls there. These people behind their walls, the rich people, the monarchy, the government, they're protected by their palace walls, but they wouldn't have this protection if it weren't for the blood, i.e. the death of these soldiers. So people are having to die to protect the monarchy's way of life. It's almost like he's shaking the reader and saying, wake up. You're not going out and being honourable for your country and fighting for your country. You're doing this so that those people can sit up in their ivory towers and be comfortable. Is that really the way you want to live your life? So he's very angry. The final stanza is the stanza that's that's the most uncomfortable, because he's talking about sexually transmitted diseases. In this case, he refers to it as a harlot's curse. So we've got here the harlot's curse blasts a newborn infant's tear. So all around London, we've got these jobs that people are having to do. I didn't mention the chimney sweepers, but we've got the chimney sweepers, which would have been child labour. And then in this last stanza, we've got the youthful harlots. I missed out the word youthful here, which I think I should have put in, so if you can add that in for your own, just because it reinforces this child labour and how these children, this innocence, is lost. These children are having to do jobs that no child should ever do, no one should ever do, but especially a child. So a harlot is a prostitute, and the curse of a harlot would be, well, there's many things that could count as a harlot, especially being a youthful harlot. But in this case, he's talking about the STDs that the harlots or the prostitutes would have got from people they were spending time with. And then they would have passed this on to their babies, and perhaps their babies would have died. So we've got the idea of this curse is blasting the newborn infant, maybe implying killing or giving them the disease. So not pleasant images at all, but he's not shying away from anything in this poem. It's childlike in tone and in rhythm, but the language choices and the message is anything but childlike. He wants people to be angry. He wants people to fight against the ruling classes. So the next part of this is obviously where I link to themes and to other poems. I think very clearly that we can see here the major theme is power, especially the power of authority of those in charge and how we need to question them. So one that might compare nicely as a difference would be the Charge of the Light Brigade, where they just accept what orders they're given, even though they will clearly send them to their death. We've also got power of place. He's talking about London, where he's from, which would compare quite nicely with Ozymandias and the Prelude. And again, linking to power, Ozymandias and the Prelude would also work well, and perhaps even My Lost Duchess, because we have there somebody who is in power over other people and has them in fear of their lives. So I think a really nice question for you to answer here, and I will write it in the box below, but the question I think you should answer for this particular poem is: compare how poets present power in London and My Lost Duchess. There's a nice challenge for you. Alright, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Bye!